So, Michael, we could play some of this piece of tape here, but first, I want to get your opening remarks on your take on Mark Zuckerberg's letter to Jim Jordan.
Hey, great to be with you, Charlie. I mean, the first thing I would say is that I think we now have enough information for independent journalists like myself. I'm not a partisan, I'm an independent, and I'm not even voting this year. But I think there's enough information now to say that both the CIA and the FBI broke the law, broke at least two laws, the Wiretap Act and the Hatch Act, to interfere in the 2020 elections on behalf of Biden and against Trump. And there was a detail in the Zuckerberg letter that wasn't there about Burisma. It mirrors exactly the Aspen Institute's disinformation operation that it ran on behalf of the FBI for Biden and against Trump. And I think it's an understanding that many people have been working towards for a lot of time, and people before I wrote about it were working on this and writing about it. I now feel comfortable to say I think the evidence is now overwhelming that both CIA and FBI interfered in the 2020 elections.
To what extent did they interfere, and what did that mean for the end result, if you were to speculate? Was it just kind of paperwork interference, or do you think as a journalist it had substantive result-directed interference?
You mean, do I think it had an impact?
Yes, the material impact on the outcome.
Well, that's hard to say. I mean, I think you can start to get to, remember, we're not very good at, because the problem is we can't get inside people's minds, and decisions and choices that people make are very complicated. So it'd be hard to say definitively that the efforts of the U.S. intelligence agencies were the decisive factor in Biden's defeat of Trump. But I will say, as somebody that voted for Biden and saw the Hunter Biden laptop story, I myself dismissed it as Russian disinformation, because not just because of the 51 former CIA directors and other senior intelligence officials signing a letter saying that's what it was, but also because Twitter and Facebook and other seemingly independent institutions, both news media and social media, had said the same thing. And so, would that have, changed my mind? I don't know. It's hard to say. But I think that whether or not it would have changed the outcome of the election, the fact of it is extremely serious. And I can't think of anything else in American history where the intelligence and security agencies interfered in an election in such a shocking, coordinated, systematic way, and not once, but multiple times. I just can't think of another time in American history. Maybe there's some moment we haven't learned about, but I can't think of any point in American history where we've seen anything like that. And of course, hundreds of years of Western liberal democratic governments have fought against that kind of thing. We don't want the king's men to be able to arbitrarily, break the law. We have constraints on both our law enforcement officers and our intelligence agencies. It's like Magna Carta level violation. It's not just U.S. Constitution violation. It is
it's like human rights. Yes.
It's a violation of human rights. It's a fundamental violation of human rights. So the significance of it, I don't think we should race past. Again, I don't think it depends. The significance of the crime doesn't depend on how effective it was. But obviously it was very effective, because the initial CIA interference starts in 2016. As late as 2016. It's as far back as I feel comfortable saying that it went. But CIA interference goes back to 2016. So you're looking at a really sweeping counter-populist effort by American intelligence and security agencies, spanning, a very significant amount of time, and arguably continuing. I think not arguably, it is continuing, in the sense that justice has not been served at a minimum Christopher Wray is still the director of the CIA, amazingly. I mean, sorry, the FBI, incredibly. Gina Haspel, the former director of the CIA, has not been brought to account. Nobody has been brought to account. There's no real investigation into it. Whatever people have called an investigation until now is obviously insufficient. So I think it's a really serious moment, at least for people like me that have not been comfortable kind of coming out and saying so strongly what I felt the need to say over the last few days.
Well, yeah, and I completely agree. This goes down to this idea, as you say, the Magna Carta in 1215 of June, that the king is not above the law, and that there's this idea above the king, and of course that eventually led to the birth of Western civilization and common law and individual initiative and sovereignty and due process and checks and balances. But yes, this idea that your intel agencies get to choose who your leaders are, that's a violation of like an 800-year unbroken chain, right?
Yeah, certainly, and certainly in the liberal democratic period of the last several hundred years. So then the question is, I mean, there's a lot of frustration online and people that have been, making this point, like yourself, for a very long time, and there's a lot of frustration. And yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of, for me, I think it's important that people that are not Trump supporters, that don't agree with Trump, that don't like Trump, that are not going to vote for Trump, I would like for them to understand the significance of this, because they don't understand it. They don't want to understand it. The media was a participant in these crimes, and they were participating the entire time in creating the Russia collusion hoax and the big lie, that Trump is a Manchurian candidate for the Russians, for Putin. The media was part of that, so they're not going to tell people. But I just kind of look forward and I go, historians will know. I mean, hopefully historians recognize what happens sooner rather than later. But I think the evidence is now overwhelming for any kind of, anybody, any independent, reasonable person to look at the facts. You can't look at them and walk away concluding anything other than that the CIA and FBI interfered in the 2020 elections.
What's to stop them from interfering in this election?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, in some ways, that is the most important question. And maybe they are. I mean, we should consider that they might already be doing that. What's interesting, there's a lot that's interesting about this case. You may know there's somebody named Martin Gurry, who's a former CIA analyst. He wrote one of the best books on the impact of the internet on politics. Not a Trump person at all. He wrote, the book is called Revolt of the Public, and it's just about the power of social media for disintermediated direct access and conversations like the one we're having, but just social media being able, so that a populist figure like Trump is not just, prevented from emerging as a serious candidate because he can speak directly to the public, and how that's just a revolution as large as the invention of the printing press and its dissemination in the 15th and 16th centuries in Europe, and all of the revolutions it resulted in, and wars, and as people dealt with the fact that they were able to communicate with each other, peer-to-peer communications. And when I did that Twitter, so my involvement in this goes back to this Twitter files thread on the Hunter Biden laptop. One of the most important aspects of which is that I discovered and described what is clearly an FBI operation through the Aspen Institute to pre-bunk or preemptively brainwash and program both all of the top journalists at all the major media outlets and the top censors in the social media platforms, including Facebook and Twitter, so that to prepare them so that when they saw the Hunter Biden laptop, they would censor it, or they would, if they were journalists, they would cover it, but focus it in a way on this idea that it was Russian disinformation. So that was run through this ostensibly independent NGO called the Aspen Institute, which is funded by the US government and was clearly working as a proxy front group, you might call it an intermediary or cutout, to engage in illegal political action that violates the Hatch Act by the FBI to run this disinformation operation. And when Martin Gurry, to finish the story, when this amazing CIA analyst read it, we spoke and he just said, this is not what the CIA used to be. There was a firewall between I mean, it's illegal. The CIA can't, and the CIA and the FBI can't involve themselves in politics. I mean, obviously it's illegal, but it's also just not the culture of those institutions. Those are not institutions. The directors of those institutions are supposed to go do nonpartisan work. But after the election, and they go be boring. He would say they would be boring after they were directors. They would go out and work at boring think tanks, and it was very bipartisan. This thing of these guys, the directors, the agents, the senior executives, the general counsel, these guys engaging in partisan politics, for Martin, it was just shocking. It's not something that that those agencies had done. And so this desire to undermine the presidency of Donald Trump and then interfere in the elections is a real watershed in American society, and I think it's a very much of a black pill moment in the sense that I think it's very frightening to know that has been going on, and that those folks felt entitled to manipulate our minds. And do they still feel that way? Because it's a sense of they don't respect democracy, they don't respect our Constitution, they don't respect us as fellow humans, and they are violating our rights. So, I mean, the long story short, yeah, I mean, I think we need to, be very vigilant in protecting our freedoms and watching these guys. We reported on continued, we think, intelligence and security agency disinformation around Russia in Europe a few months ago in relationship to counterpopulism against right-wing populist parties in Europe. Definitely happening there. But yeah, we should, I think, be very vigilant that it could be happening now in some way that we don't understand or see, or that it will happen between now and the elections.